Good to see you, Shreyas.
Hey, nice to see you, James. I'll be back in like a minute, actually.
That's good.
All right.
Hey, folks.
Hey, Romy.
How's it going?
Hey, Cash, good to see you again.
A real pleasure, man. I was delighted to see you on the panelist list after all this time.
Yeah, man.
And then did I see you dipping into that layer 3 Twitter space earlier today as well?
Yeah. I was just hanging around. It was a good chat. Pizza DAO was fun. I didn't know about
that. There's always some new fun experiment in the DAO world. Hopefully we'll cover some of those today.
I'll be right back as well. I'll just be a minute.
So for, I know we're at 3 o'clock right now. As you can tell, some of our panelists are kind of getting themselves situated. So we'll probably get going in a few minutes here. So to all the attendees, Harshviv, Harish, Leander, Srijani. Oh, Srijani, how's it going? We'll get going in a minute here. Let me pull up my notes here as well. Okay. Cool. People still filtering in. Don't be scared by the silence. We will get started in a minute or two. If you have a good meme, put it into the chat. Maybe we can look at some memes to kick this off on a light note before we get into the very serious topic of DAOs. We will see. I really feel like Zoom should implement some kind of like music integration with Spotify for this kind of moment, you know? Like it'd be nice just to like click of a button and now my little playlist is playing. Until then, I will have to sing for everybody. I'm very sorry to tell you so. Just kidding. Excellent. And Janelle has arrived as well.
Janelle,
hey, gosh.
Always in front of his big trophy collection.
Yeah, it's always flexing this guy, you know.
This is the only place in the house I get stable internet, so yeah.
How convenient is that, right? In front of the
yeah.
The trophies are like antennas. They actually boost the signal. They radiate the signal behind him.
Yeah.
So many trophies.
All my NFTs.
Cool. So the panelists are all here. I think we'll give it maybe just another like 30 seconds or so to kick off. Srijan, does that sound okay for you as well? Srijan, who is muted. All right. I'll tell you what. You guys ready to go? Should we kick off now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. Hello and welcome everybody to this Ethernals Hackathon panel here on DAOs. I will be the moderator for this. My name is Cash. I'm one of the core contributors at the Super Team DAO, which is a service DAO based on the Solana ecosystem, actually. And I will be leading the session for the rest of it. Our goal today, over the next 45 minutes or so, maybe 60 minutes, is to dig into the state of DAOs, and in particular, how you guys as hackathon participants can start to build things that serve DAOs or build DAOs yourself. So we're going to assume that everyone listening in has at least a basic familiarity with what a DAO is and kind of how they operate, and that'll let us skip some of the more kind of boring definitional stuff and move right into like the opportunities. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll not only understand DAOs in a bit more detail, but you'll also be inspired to build something great that helps DAOs in the Ethereum ecosystem. So to help deliver that inspiration, I am joined by just like a rock star panel here. So shout out to DevFolio for putting this gang together. We have Janelle, who is the CEO of Coinvise, a platform that lets anybody launch a tokenized community. They have tools for token creation, airdropping, investing, and incentives, and a bunch of other really cool stuff. Tremendous builder in the space. We have Shreyas, the founder of the Llama community. He is a humble guy, so I will say it on his behalf. I think he is the single best thinker in DAOs around treasury management and issues like that. A real OG in the space, so it's a pleasure to have him here as well. We have James, founder of Abridged, which is a no-code platform to enable blockchain apps to get built. He's also the creator of Collabland, which I think might be the most used piece of DAO tooling in the world, James. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. But yeah, obviously essential infrastructure for DAOs based on Ethereum. And he's also a member, like a literal OG as a member of Moloch and Metacartel and others. And then finally, we have Romit from Lightspeed Ventures, which is one of the most forward-thinking VCs in the space in India, in my opinion. They've invested both in Web2 companies and Web3 companies, including Yuga Labs, FTX, Solana, and a bunch of others. So killer group of panelists here. We're going to be diving into things in a second. Maybe to warm up, put a little GM into the chat just to say hello if you're here watching on Zoom. And one last final thing, if you have any questions during this as an attendee, feel free to pop that question into the chat. We'll have a dedicated Q&A at the end, but hopefully we'll mix in some questions from the audience along the way. Sound good? All right, cool. So to start us off here, I think it'd be useful to think about where we were and where we've come to in the DAO space. And so James, I'd love to start with you, given kind of your deep roots in the system here. DAOs have been around, I guess, since 2016, since the DAO hack, and then kind of made a resurgence a year or two ago with Moloch and Metacartel. So from your perspective, I'd love to hear how the DAO landscape has changed, and in particular, what kind of new challenges DAOs are facing today that maybe they didn't face before, or maybe the problems weren't as acute before?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. Really grateful and appreciative to have this opportunity to speak and to share info. When we launched Moloch in 2019, like DAOs were kind of a bad word because of the 2016 hack. And so we didn't really know how well received Moloch was going to be. We did it for existential reasons because at that point, this was like 2018, we were in this bear market and there was difficulty getting ETH2 researchers funded. And Vitalik at the end of 2018 was over Twitter giving out 100K worth of ETH to these researchers because of, I don't know if it was paperwork, whatever the issues were with, getting grants. They're like, hey, we're going to have to close up shop, or, we're hurting here. And so when Vitalik did that, obviously he did it like 3 times. And then it was like, okay, wait, maybe there's a better way to do this. And so we're like, okay, we had this DAO framework on the shelf. It was very complex. And so what we did was we said, okay, the forcing function is reduce it to its minimum viable kind of core. And let's just launch it at the next ETH Global event, which was ETH Denver 2019. I had just moved to Colorado a few months before. I said, okay, let's do this. And so that was kind of the beginnings of it. From that, it took a while operating in DAOs. And I think it was this kind of progression where you had DeFi, then NFTs, and then DAOs kind of underneath the surface there. I really think that anytime you have like shared treasure, you're basically, I guess that's a DAO, right? Whenever you're voting. And that's kind of my definition. And now what I see in terms of the evolution of where we're at with DAOs is these second order effects. So now you have a bunch of people LARPing in DAOs, and now you're having these second DAOs, and you're getting this network of DAOs happening. So I think the focus has been, okay, can we just create tooling so that we can better communicate with each other? And Collabland was born out of this frustration because I could not connect in a DAO with 0x123. I didn't even know who that was. Like, I could not even debate or like argue a proposal in a DAO. And so Collabland was just this kind of cheat code to like, everyone's already in chat. Why build a website? Let's just stay in chat where people already are at. And so now I think the challenge is, how do we interop between DAOs? And this is what we're seeing. And we're super bullish now in terms of decentralized IDs and verifiable credentials. And I think this is going to be this kind of next unlock when it comes to interoperability amongst DAOs.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think composability is so kind of vital to Web3 in general, and that piece around like identity and credentialing, I think, is also essential there. So Romit, I'd love to pass it over to you. What have you seen that's kind of exciting in this kind of decentralized identity, this credentialing, all those associated areas? What's been catching your eye?
Yeah, absolutely. In a conversation with founders, it often comes up the DAOs have a fundamental problem of sort of figuring out what the proof of history of work is of a lot of contributors that come. While DAOs, the decentralization enables such an amazing fluidity of talent, which is absolutely unsurpassed in any kind of organizational form factor. The challenge becomes, how do you actually verify the contributors that come in and what they can add to the community? What are they historically good at, and what will they be good at? And we've just seen a bunch of incredible founders going after that problem to really sort of think about building both on-chain as well as off-chain credentialism for these contributors. In fact, it's one of the investments that we've closed recently as well that exactly does that, allowing DAOs to essentially understand their contributors better, reward them for their work, and track their contribution and progress within the community. So yeah, extremely excited about the space, as James mentioned, and we'll see a ton of more innovation coming out of there.
Yeah, I think it's only gonna go up from here for sure. And speaking of kind of progressing through the community, I think Janelle, this would be a great place to get your perspective as someone who's thought deeply about kind of community members and DAOs and the tokenized communities and how people can start to move through them. Can you share some of your where your head's at right now on how kind of structures can be set up either from the tooling side or on the social side to enable DAO contributors like this?
Yeah, I think it's like when you start building a DAO, I think the first thing to tackle is like, how do you get people to participate? It's actually really hard than you think, but if the idea and the mission is really clear, you'll eventually find like a small set of people or an intimate set of people that may be willing to participate with you. We built tools at Coinwise that make it simple to maybe automate creating a token or distributing it in different ways. But really the core challenge is how do you get people to meaningfully participate with each other, where tooling like Collabland and a bunch of others come into picture. And then the second part of it, once you grow to a certain point, you do have a certain level of visibility and people interested. How do you continue to retain them? So I think those are the two sort of challenges that I'm interested in seeing, and I think the latter is a bit harder than the former. But yeah, I think building DAOs today is partly maybe either fetishized or in some cases it's really done the right way, and when it does, it's just really beautiful. So it's not maybe proportional to the size of it, but maybe like the impact that comes out of it. So the output is really amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And kind of like on the same theme of like people moving between DAOs, and to James's earlier point around kind of DAO to DAO composability, I think there's a lot of excitement in the space generally around this kind of feeling of D to D businesses, of DAO to DAO businesses, in contrast to B2B businesses that used to exist. Obviously, Shreyas, Llama is playing very much in this space. So could you give people a bit of an overview around like what D to D even is and kind of what's going on in the space?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting first, maybe it'd be helpful to set a context of what's really different between DAO to DAO and B2B. I think one major difference is with B2B, the structure is quite rigid, which is, you're sort of business development, you're selling to a CEO or a chief compliance officer or a chief risk officer, depending on what your product does. And you're typically having some proprietary software that you're keeping with yourself or some other proprietary service. With DAO to DAO models, you're kind of you're sort of, it's much more fluid. So what it means for, say, Llama to work on Aave's like treasury strategy, it's almost like Llama's a contributor in Aave. And that we're just the most active contributor and the best maybe on the treasury side. But really anyone can step in and do treasury work. And so what we've found is, we're this force on the treasury side, but we actually attract talent within the DAO to join Llama. And by joining Llama, you're actually serving Aave as well. So for example, there are two contributors that come to mind where we actually, did a lot of proactive treasury work at Aave. And there were these two individual contributors who were, really sort of thoughtful and did a lot of work at Aave, but really couldn't carry that through, because to do any on-chain treasury proposal, you need to do some risk modeling, you need to have a financial skill set, you need to write this treasury proposal, and then you need to write the smart contracts to implement this on-chain. And then you need to get this through governance. And so you need to actually, lobby folks. And so it's quite a varied skill set to just pass one proposal. And individuals find it hard to do that. And so So some of these folks who were just doing things in Aave just joined us, and now it furthers both them, Aave, as well as Llama. And so I think the fluidity of what a DAO to DAO relationship means something that a lot of people still not getting used to, where you see some of the proposals that really to serve DAOs with particular products or services maybe aren't that DAO native, because they don't fully appreciate that what you're doing when you're building something for FWB or for Aave or Uniswap is that there is a composability, not just of, just like DeFi has composability of code, but yeah, you do have composability of these communities, of the contributors, and you do need to have some openness of what exactly you're doing, like a level of transparency that, some of the B2B businesses maybe don't have. And there's a way that you interface with on-chain governance that's actually quite unusual, versus like, just setting it to a chief like executive officer, risk officer, and just, getting it done.
Yeah.
Can I chime in here real quick, just to kind of riff off what Shreyas is saying? It's really interesting because in a way, I almost think of it as like we are all working for the kind of overall same organization. And these DAOs, you can think of it as like ephemeral or dynamically adjusting departments that are helping each other. So as Shreyas was talking about, and I think that like the opportunities with DAOs is just this dynamism that occurs, right? So, as a typical startup founder, you may be good at leading when the company is at a certain scale, but it grows and you get success, and you may not be, if you can't rise to the occasion, there may be someone within the organization that could be the new CEO or the new leader. And so with traditional organizations, you have the title, you have your equity, you have that all kind of, it's almost like a static snapshot. But what I think is really great about DAOs is this fluidity, like Shreyas was mentioning, where different companies can kind of come together for specific initiatives, and it happens so quickly, and you can organize. And I really think that when it comes to a DAO structure, we have to have some similar context based off of the corporation. But I think that thinking about DAOs in that context can be somewhat of a trap. It's almost like, when you look at car vehicle engines, they're measured in horsepower. Why? It's because that was what came before. It's a vestige, but like horsepower it has some meaning, but there may be better ways to define in a DAO context what it means to like really have a high trust environment, right? And I think, Eskimos, they have 30 different words for ice or snow. And I think we'll need to have our own vocabulary when it comes to how we work dynamically within these organizations. And I really think that like here, the opportunities of DAOs is to kind of also just kind of see if we can reimagine the future of work. And really it's, I think, not about copying what organizationally works in Web 2 and bring it over to Web 3, but knowing what to kind of unlearn organizationally from Web 2 to Web 3. And I think also the kind of trappings can be that, you're like, hey, this is a brand new thing. Let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I do think that there are opportunities and a lot of great learning, maybe not even on the technical side, just, organizational science wise, because when you have money and people coming together, especially if a lot of them are anons over the internet, like how do you work this new type of organization online that is like completely dynamic? And I do think like, we're going to see and understand what a network of loosely coupled organizations will look like now that we have composable corporations, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful kind of like mental image to have, right? Like literal town kind of swashing around like waves in between different kind of shorelines, we might call it, right? And I think that the potential of DAOs, not just as a literal piece of high technology, but as a social technology and the way that we kind of come together is super exciting. But James, as you pointed out, it is new and it is difficult to kind of grok. So perhaps for the audience, it might be helpful for us to take a second and think through like what some of those Web 2 mindsets that should be left behind in this new kind of future of work would be. I don't know if anyone in particular wants to go off. Ramit, maybe we can start with you. What are some of the kind of Web 2 mindsets that don't really apply when we're moving into a DAO focused world?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is an organization of hierarchy and the way authority flows through the ranks. I think a Web2 organization particularly works well when there's an aligned goal directed from the top, and then the entire organization in some sense supporting that. In my mind, the DAOs that I've had the most fun engaging with have been ones where people have been taking initiatives bottoms up and driving great outcomes. And actually, Super Team DAO, and kudos to you, Cash, for pulling that together, is a great example of that. There's just a ton of stuff happening. I don't think you're aware of so many of the initiatives that might be happening there anymore. And that's just because it's fostered a sense of community where everyone feels a sense of ownership, which is so inherently unique to what a DAO unlocks. And I think that's a great mindset to sort of, get rid of from a Web2 world, which also, however, means that for, if you need to achieve an outcomes of a large Web2 company, for example, let's say building what it takes to build, let's say, a large social company on Web3, maybe DAO is not the right structure, right? Maybe there are certain possibilities that DAOs unlock, which are very unique to that organization structure itself, which could be, for example, hey, a social community that works fantastic in a DAO setting because, a person's ideas are limited, but you sort of unleash an entire community, the world is possible. And so it's applying that lack of hierarchy, bottom-up driven innovation to differentiated use cases. I think that's where DAOs become really, really powerful. And I think that's pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it does take a fundamentally different kind of perspective to be able to be effective in that kind of environment, certainly from a leadership position such as it is in DAOs, but enabling that kind of bottoms up contribution is difficult. Janil, I know that's another topic that you've thought a little bit about in terms of how to kind of incentivize it and how to let these communities self-organize.
Yeah, I think, incentives are great. What's fascinating to me is this idea that you can sort of have different levels of ownership within these sort of groups of people. Even within DAOs, you'll probably see at certain stages, we'll see like naturally smaller working groups form. I know in Super Team DAO or many other DAOs, there's these smaller groups of people that have their own sort of goals and vision, and how they have like their own intrinsic incentives on how they want to work. And it's this bottom-up structure that beautifully works. And there aren't like hierarchies, but there's soft structures that make it work, which is kind of fascinating. But incentives are probably like useful in setting, like keeping in mind some level of like long-term vision and not just like short-term gamified approaches where it just dies out. It's probably useful to retain that level of energy within those smaller working groups and ensure that people are aligned long-term and it's just not one-off contributions because they die out. And it's really hard to keep that up. So probably like think about incentives as a way of like, how do you continue to provide value to some of these contributors in a long-term way? And what are some things that are useful to them, and structure incentives around them. So yeah, ownership is a like very useful unlock in setting these incentives, because you can think about these things from day one. And you can think about like, okay, who's been the most valuable even without a token incentive? Because then you can reward them because they ended up contributing without any like financial benefit, or because they just truly align with your values. I think those are the people you should really reward, and you identify them as you go.
Yeah, it's always a kind of emergent traits. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think another thing really unusual about DAOs in a positive way versus Web2 is just the openness and transparency. I think we take it for granted when you work in crypto for enough time, but it is, first it starts with open source being at the heart of it. Like, you can actually look at the code and verify things. That, DAOs at the heart of it, you have, smart contracts that encode membership and ownership and property. And then you have kind of the culture and the leadership, right? Like it's kind of, you can actually, Vitalik for a long time and he still does, he'll respond to random people's messages and comments and insults on Twitter, and he'll you just compare that to the leaders of Google and Facebook, who are extremely unreachable. And it's not sort of blaming them particularly, but the nature of software is different. Like when you're open source and you're building a community kind of owns your creation, your accountability is different. Like you can actually like Telegram message Stani and he'll probably respond. Like it's a very different culture. And secondly, like the Discord itself, like a lot of these Discords are actually open for anyone to see. You can see the balance sheets live, real time. Like we put a lot of effort in this, but you can actually look at you go to openorgs.info and see all the top 50 treasuries. And yeah, there's a way to participate in governance, which is again open and transparent. You can go to the governance forums of all these protocols. You can see what's happening since inception, including for Ethereum, and you can propose things without anyone's permission. So all that it's something you spend enough time in DAOs, you fully internalize that. But it is all very unusual. Like there's, on the treasury side, it's almost like if Google or Stripe opened up their balance sheet and put it up for a vote for the community to decide what to do with it. That's just kind of unheard of. It's usually, one or two sort of large holders of these companies that have, full rights to decide, how the resources are spent. And so I think, yeah, there's a bunch of things on openness and transparency that are particularly interesting to me.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a mindset shift. We have a bunch of questions coming in the Q&A, and I definitely do want to get to those. Before we do, maybe we can make this kind of the last like roundtable stuff before we dig into those. Obviously, there's a lot of hype around DAOs, and I think there's a lot of popular misconceptions for people who just kind of read the thought boys on Twitter. So maybe we can go around the circle and talk about some of the maybe some hot contrarian DAO takes. So like, what do people who are not involved in DAOs or not building for DAOs, what do they oftentimes kind of get wrong? And James is somebody who's done a lot of this in the past. Where do you see like the popular conception kind of separate from the reality?
I think that there's a lot of hype with being able to pull capital together. And I think that it can work against a DAO because you get a bunch of random people, a lot of them anons trying to work together, and you have a large pot that they need to figure out how to spend. And it's easy, I think, and it's been proven that it's easy to pull capital, but like it's very difficult to allocate it correctly. Like that's the hard part. And so when you set yourself up to create a bunch of people pulling a bunch of capital together, I think you kind of set yourself up to fail in a way, especially if it's not a high trust environment and it's just strangers. How do you decide how to allocate it correctly? And so I think, my hot take is that you'll probably see a lot of like zombie DAOs where capital is like locked up, but they don't know how to allocate it. So they'll either like leave or things get stuck. And I think we'll need that in order to be able to understand. And where I think this is going is really about like creating high trust small groups. So, for me, like I get mentored by Colin Breyer. He was the chief of staff to Jeff Bezos. He wrote a book called Working Backwards. And it's like learning how to create this culture or process of innovation. And so I think that when I look at organizations that are successful, like Amazon, they were infamous for like the 2 pizza teams, and they have words and vocabulary like single-threaded leadership. And I think that those concepts can work really well in DAOs. Small high trust group, single-threaded leadership, meaning that there's one person that is like launching an initiative and they completely own it. So to the other members of the panel about ownership is very important. And I think it's this small high trust teams moving in fluid ways that you'll see this kind of network of DAOs emerge. And those that are successful will eventually want to work with others that are successful. So there'll be this kind of self-selecting filtering process when you have this dynamicism when it comes to these small, high throughput, high output groups of DAOs working together. And I think that you see that with even like the NFT community, right? With Bored Ape coming out and buying CryptoPunks. And so you'll see this kind of working. And I really do believe, like, even though NFT communities are not DAOs, they're kind of are like DAOs in a way, because these are like internet native startups using internet native magic money, and just forming themselves with these magic internet corporations or, coordination. So yeah, that's my.
Love that. Indeed, I personally am also very bullish on small DAOs, a little bit bearish on large DAOs. I think for most people on the panel would probably agree that just number of members is a vanity metric, right? It doesn't actually produce real results. So love that hot take there, James. Rohit, any hot takes or contrarian thoughts to share with the group on DAOs?
Yeah, I think the largest DAOs, and by treasury value, I don't think they've done a good enough job of educating the community on what a true DAO and what true decentralization means. For context, Uniswap, for example, spends less than 0.06% of its total treasury today on its community grants program. It's really, really small. And I think there is a real space for large DAOs who have, amassed a ton of treasury to essentially step up and essentially lobby to set up and, in some sense, make clear what a DAO truly stands for and fund a lot more around DAO tooling and development in this ecosystem. So I think they can definitely set up. And the point related to that is because the governance around DAOs are so unstructured today, it's also in many forms or ways become a little bit of a bait and switch. Many of the DAOs that exist are neither decentralized nor are they autonomous. Decentralization, whenever they start with, is used as a marketing shtick, with actual decentralizations planned sometime in the future with no clear roadmap. And I think that leads to definite kind of disillusionment from a lot of contributors who would want to own a piece of that community and truly be in it for the ecosystem that that they were promised. So I think there's a real need for leadership to emerge in DAOs, and it's natural. Even in a democratic system, some folks to emerge at the forefront of making their voices heard. I'd expect the largest DAOs to step up and make a case for themselves on what true decentralization truly means.
Yeah, love that. Indeed, one of the things we say at Super Team a lot of the time is decentralization is not the absence of leaders, but rather the abundance of them, right? It's that everybody can kind of quickly become a leader. Cool. The questions continue to flow in. So I do want to just quickly go over to Janil on any last hot takes to give on that.
I don't have any hot takes per se, but maybe just from experience, please don't try to reverse engineer it. I know many people try to just see how DAOs form and just go with the natural energy of just, I'm going to launch a token, I'm going to do this, and just try to bundle everything in a really short cycle. Trust doesn't work that way. It takes really, really long time to build. It takes a lot of time to build culture. Really try to focus on like a small group of people that you work with, try to build a strong relationship and probably go slow because it doesn't often solve all your problems.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. Indeed, there was a question as well in the chat around, do you need to figure out your tokenomics before you launch your DAO? And probably. I think, yeah, James called out, important to get that right, but it really is the trust first. So for context, Super Team DAO does not have a token because we're heads down just on the community here. And then Shreyas, over to you for any kind of last thoughts on DAOs generally, separating fact from fiction, hype from reality.
Yeah, I think, one interesting thing that I've been spending a lot of time in is kind of how to build an economy within a DAO. And kind of approach, your DAO as a network and an internal economy. And if you think about building an economy, there are now this doesn't apply to all DAOs. I think there are some DAOs where this definitely doesn't apply, but I think for some, it is interesting where you can think through the volume of economic activity that happens within your DAO, the number of transactions that happens between members of your DAO, the number of the percentage of income that DAO members are able to generate themselves versus doing it outside the DAO, and doing things almost from as a mayor. I've spoken to Alex from FWB about this, and I think they approach it similarly, which is as a leader of your DAO, what should you do to increase I think the volume of activity within the DAO, whether that's you can almost approach it as community GDP. There's probably things, if you think about how nation states have done it, you could think about special economic zones or tax benefits or sort of protecting sort of facilitating certain types of interactions between members. I think those things are things that we will get more sophisticated, over the next 5 to 6 years. But right now, it's been done more. It's evolved more organically. But I think that there can be some templates for building an economy within a DAO that I'm kind of excited about.
Yeah, thank you. Me as well. Community GDP, I think is a great one, and there's tons of other great models. And how does a DAO actually measure its success? With that, let's move into some of the Q&A coming in from the audience over here. And there's a great one right off the bat. And James, I'll throw it to you first because I think you might have just typed your answer. Too slow or too cumbersome to actually get things done. So James, can you talk about decision-making in DAOs?
Yeah, I think that, you're going to have voter apathy and all these other human conditions that have occurred prior to DAOs with any voting system. DAOs are not like a magic bullet here. A DAO allows things to happen more efficiently and in a more optimized manner if you have a high trust group. And I think that's really kind of what we're trying to figure out. And, when it comes to DAO tooling, whether it's verifiable credentials, it's like, how do you measure and interpret like trust? And so I think that if you don't have a high trust group, you're going to have voter apathy. It's going to be hard to move and to coordinate people. If you have people that are value aligned, that provides trust because they're all working toward the same goal, and it can be a much more efficient. So you can't get around the aspect of people, no matter how much you want to automate. The automation part will make bad things even worse because of voter apathy or lack of being able to move people to make a decision, or it could highlight and will, make your A team an A++ team. Right. So it augments in either direction. So I think that, if you're a startup, you're looking to start a DAO. When we started Moloch, just by the nature of it, Moloch still is a permissioned DAO. And that in hindsight, and this was not, and I was there, so I know this, the original intention, but what it does is it creates very high trust, because when you're bringing in someone, the whole group knows that you're bringing that person in. And so there is this like social pressure consensus. Same thing with like Metacartel at the beginning. Peter was the one who went through like 8 hours worth of Zoom calls. This is even before COVID, and was just interviewing people to see just, is this someone that I would want to work with or just hang out with? So I think you can't get around the trust issue. I think that's the thing that people don't really think about, and think that, I'll just put this token, do this thing, and my economics will be the proxy for trust. I think that doesn't necessarily work. And, people are people, and it's just, you have to surround yourselves with high performing people that you trust. I think there's no way around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Shreyas, why don't you read that line? It's so good, it deserves to be said out loud.
Yeah, Zach from Coordinape had this quote that DAOs should grow at the speed of trust. I love this. Like, I think, what James described with Moloch and Metacartel aligns with this. Ed Lama, we've thought about this very intentionally, which is, it's very hard to get 2 people to trust each other. It's hard to get 5 people to trust each other. And if you don't have these people trust each other, and then you grow to like a group of 200 people, you're basically, destroyed the whole thing. Like, you can't, it's hard to kind of build that then from scratch. Again, this need not apply to every type of DAO. Like, there are probably some types of DAOs where, you can actually scale much faster, and maybe you don't, need as much of a trust factor. But something like what Llama is doing, where, we have these groups that, work on treasury proposals with other DAOs, you really need to make sure that people generously give credit where it's due. People know that they have each other's backs. You're dealing with kind of important things that are happening in these DAOs and treasury assets. And so it's very hard to work if we just ran this open thing if anyone can join, and it's 1,000 person Discord or something. So yeah, I kind of really value this. You're growing at the speed of trust.
No, it's so good. And Coordinape is great for anyone who hasn't checked it out. Shout shout them out as well. Kind of relatedly, on this topic of kind of trust among people, I think that there's important that obviously the community trusts each other, but also that community members trust maybe some of the leaders or people who are in positions of power. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee around any tools for solving for that problem around accountability and credibility of DAO leaders and core team members. Most decisions are being made by core team members, but it's joining early on enough as to be a core team member, so on in that kind of space. Janil or Romit, either of you guys aware of any tools kind of working towards this accountability and credibility problem?
I think like a lot of projects around Treasury, like Parcel, have been working around. I mean, Rabbit Hole is also a great example. Even I would probably say Coinwise too. I mean, we've been sort of dabbling this idea of collective participation and how do you sort of maintain accountability. That's actually one of the core discussions we've been having for a while. Is think about this. I think in the past year or year and a half, there's been numerous DAOs launched. There's creators building these awesome communities, and a lot of these communities are tokenized and operating as a DAO. But how have those trajectories been? If you have those governance tokens, what's the core utility around it, and how is trust evolved? I think like being able to have that sort of level of accountability once like there's a certain level of stakeholders and contributors, it's just really, really important. So yeah, we're about to address this soon in some of the next updates we have, but I think Parcel is great. I think Coordinate is really, really good. Collabland, yeah.
I think yeah, maybe to add to what Janil said, I think accountability stems from being able to accurately measure what your contributors or people in leadership positions in a DAO are doing, and then sort of reward them accordingly, right? And so we've seen a bunch of founders essentially building in this space, not just in India, but globally. I think very, very early stages of that. I'd probably plug in a Lightspeed investment to watch out for, which we'll announce in a couple of weeks, doing exactly that. And yeah, because that's exactly the problem that the founders wanted to solve. How does the DAO community figure out who's responsible for X, and once they complete X, how do you reward them for that? And once that contributor completes that X, how can they carry the proof of that completion to other DAOs that they may choose to contribute to? So that's exactly what we funded. Watch out for it in a couple of weeks.
A nice little teaser of some coming alpha. That's the best. That's why we come to these panels, for those teasers. Awesome. So let's go over to another question here. James has just got the fastest fingers in the West. He's answering questions as I read them, so I got to switch over to the tabs. Let's do a nice broad general question. Again, knowing that the audience is primarily builders looking to create things, either DAOs or DAO tooling. Can people talk about what are some of the problems faced by people who are actually building DAOs right now? James, you've already answered here, so I'll throw it over to you first, and we can kind of go through the group.
Yeah, I think it's really just kind of this ongoing coordination reduction, right? Like, the way I think about like what we're doing here on the DAO space is this coordination reduction on the lines of like, like time, right? And what we're building are the clocks. So it's like, how do you build a better clock to align synchronized coordination? Or like GPS, right? So like GPS, when you had it in your car as a GPS device, was maybe not as useful as having it like on your phone and on your person in your pocket. So when it comes to coordination reduction, and if that's the lens that we're looking at it from a people's perspective with DAOs, my kind of thesis, and this has been informed and validated through Collabland, is like, we don't have to reinvent the tools from scratch necessarily. Maybe we can, piece together, if there was, imagine a world where there was a Collabland bot on Discord, on GitHub, on Notion, on Zoom, and they're all kind of synchronized together. We can actually use tooling from Web2 communities, or not communities, but companies. And they've poured millions, if not hundreds of $millions in proper UI, UX. So maybe it's like, can we, as we're trying to figure out what DAOs mean, use tooling that already exists? And so I think that's kind of like the pragmatism that I look at it, instead of like trying to reinvent the wheel all over again, which is necessary and which will happen. But I think right now we just need this like shared contact. So like, I may have an idea for a DAO tool, but I need to figure out how to build that tool and then educate users on how to use it. So for me, the cheat code is let's just integrate with every platform that exists out there, and every platform will have an API, because that every company on the internet is going to want to, because it's on the internet, leverage network effects. So you're going to have an API. And so for us at Collabland is like, what's the smartest cheat codes that we can have? Do we do Reddit next? Do we have like longer form, conversation posts along with Discord, or do we do GitHub, where you can actually automate the bounties on GitHub and then have them reflect back in Discord? It's this type of kind of creative tooling for what we have, because then we don't have to be the ones educating people on how to use a certain tool or platform. They just need to know the crypto bit or crypto aspect of it. And so that's how we take a look at, or that's our lens in terms of coordination, and just trying to, be as practical as possible, and instead of reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. That actually, I think, leads into a next question. Janelle, I don't know if you paid Rashad for this question or what, but in terms of kind of getting more people on board, to James' early point, in respect to the creator economy, how can we minimize the entry barrier for DAOs and incentivize creators since they might not know so much about Web3? Janelle, I have a sneaking suspicion you have some thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent a lot of time thinking about onboarding, especially because a lot of the people that use Coinwise, they're familiar with maybe OpenSea, not as much as Uniswap, which is kind of odd. And we've done one-to-one calls with communities or founders that are thinking about building a DAO and what it looks like to them. And I think there's a lot of like vital questions, like how do we think about token design? How do we sort of think about early bootstrapping, where how do we get the early contributors in the DAO? How do we continue to, share ownership? Who should be the people that should be the major stakeholders? How do you make those really important key decisions early on? And I think a lot of this is iteration. I think there's maybe too much emphasis early on the token design or some of these like questions. They're really, really important. But what's also important is identifying or at least having like a shared roadmap, where you can publicly talk about this, what we're building, this is the idea, this is our mission, and here's what we're aiming to build. We're going to maybe split this into sprints or seasons on how we aim to achieve this. And that's going to naturally attract people that may be interested. And then you can sort of take it from there and not just launch a token, but wait till you launch a token and establish some level of, I guess, coordination or see how people would be willing to contribute meaningfully. And as you iterate over it, you'll identify people who stick, and you'll identify, more importantly, what sort of is the core value that continues to bring people in. And at a time where you can sort of have this sort of level of minimum viable community, I think that's probably a time where you can think about doing a token. But to get there, I think try to play around. I think we've spent lots of time on Coinwise to make it really, really simple in terms of the product, the design, even onboarding, where it's just really simple. So the best way to learn is to do it.
That's right. Make it easy for people to actually get involved and get on board.
Yeah.
Indeed, there were some other tokenomics questions. And actually, Shreyas, I don't know if you remember this. When we spoke at the very beginning, when we were kind of starting Super Team DAO, you gave us some very good advice. Do you remember what it was, or should I put words into your mouth?
Yeah, I think it was that don't worry about the tokenomics yet.
Right.
That was the summary. Yeah, I think like it's sort of important to first get all these other things right, like what Janelle mentioned. You want to get your first, what are you doing, what are you gathered here for, set sort of the reason to have some capital is that you can set things in motion, and like in the sense you can get people to do things. You don't need capital to do that. In fact, it'd be best if people can start contributing without having any capital, but then capital of course helps it, and token maybe helps incentivize it. But ideally it'd be nice to have all of that without incentives. And if you can get some level of community market fit, product market fit without incentives, then you add incentives on top, and it's amazing. But if you have incentives too early, then you just don't know why something is working. It's kind of like doing paid ads for your startup just in your first few weeks of launch or something. And so I think that's sort of my summary. At the same time, now if you are thinking about tokenomics, let's say you or just like, let's talk about like token distribution. If you achieve some product market fit. I actually think this is something that right now there's sort of some standard templates around how people are doing this. And I actually think I would encourage people to experiment a little more, which is right now I'd say there's some sense of 40 to 60% goes to a community treasury, say 5 to 10% goes to an airdrop to users, say 10 to 15% goes to the team, and then some amount goes to investors of folks who participate in the round. I think that should really change. Like, people shouldn't accept that as some type of norm or template. There's no reason it should be that way. There's no reason you should have this much in a community treasury. Maybe there should be more experiments with no treasury and actually having a program distribution of tokens right up front. That's another idea I think is interesting to explore. Like, if you think of it's a little different topic, but if you think about Bitcoin, Bitcoin's programmed the distribution of their token from the beginning, right? And there's a every 4 years there's this much Bitcoin that's distributed to miners. There's a specific way to earn these tokens, and it's actually it's almost like a transparent, decentralized game that then encourages this whole network of participants, miners, and folks who can pretty much now there's a hydropower involved, and there's ASIC mining chips designed specifically for mining Bitcoin. There's a whole economy built around getting Bitcoin tokens. And I see this sort of parallel with some DAOs that think about token distribution this way. Like Curve is an example where there's a specific way, you can get Curve, and there's a specific way that Curve can be used for adjusting certain gauges. I can drop a link to sort of Curve's tokenomics. And because of that, there's all sorts of players, both in Curve and outside of Curve, that have that are trying to build things to use these tokens. And so not to say that these are the right models. It really depends on your DAO. And so what I just encourage is, like, you don't need to accept sort of some of the standard distributions that you see as this is the norm. Having said that, the first caveat is, don't worry about tokenomics for a while until you really discover what you're building and get some fit with the community you have and your users.
Yeah, I think maybe there's a separate panel that we should have at some point around like emissions-based token schedules, what Seed Club is doing with their kind of governance-based inflation over time. I think is really interesting, but perhaps beyond some of the scope of this one right here. As we're kind of coming towards the end, I think it'd be great to get a little concrete with some of this. It's been fantastic kind of mindsets and theory and so on. Dazresh asked a question here. Are there any DAO projects working on real world problems, like in actual corporations, companies, or societies? I see some smiles because there are indeed. Would anyone like to share some of their favorite examples? Too many examples to share. Maybe it'll be easier. James, I see you smiling the broadest. So would you like to go first?
So I interpreted that question as like, are there DAOs that are like solving real world problems? So I put in Climate DAO for climate change. And I do think that, like, these bigger coordination games that require us to work together, like climate change, I don't think is going to be solved by like a corporation or maybe even a government. But I do think there is, if hope of being able to tackle climate change would be through some like decentralized organization. And so I think that there are these like really large problems that now we can try and look at in different ways, because it's all incentives, whether it's, this prisoner's dilemma that we all live in, because, everyone is balancing out these like short-term incentives versus long-term incentives, right? There's the saying that, people that are incentivized short-term think about how can I get rich? People that think about long-term incentives is how do we make each other rich? And I think, we use the word trust to be able to understand where people's motives and incentives are. But I think to just kind of dial it back to this question, what are these existential issues that we have? And it gets very philosophical in terms of like, can we on a worldwide global scale coordinate to solve things like climate change? And so I think these are the kind of aspirations that like fuel my curiosity, because we have this technology and, coming from the game space, it's almost like these DAOs are just MMOs, but instead of us going and downloading an app and playing in this fictional universe, like the game has now sprawled out into IRL. And what great games can we create, and what great games can we play? And so, yeah, I don't want to get too philosophical because it's very easy to get very thought leadery, right? And so we want to just balance between practicality versus like kind of long-term vision and goal.
I mean, it's natural when you have literally 4 thought leaders in the DAO space talking. There'll be some thought leadership that happens because you guys are kind of writing the future. So that's not too surprising. Rohit, any examples on your end of some of the DAOs that you're excited about addressing real world problems?
I was going to say the climate DAOs as well. I think it's a super powerful community that brings together incentives to work on the most pressing problem I imagine that faces us in the 21st century. So yeah, probably that was going to be my example as well.
Gotcha. Janil, Shreyas, anything on your end?
I think like speaking about climate DAOs, I'd like to give a shout out to Jesse Zondervan. He's been working on planetary resilience DAO, and there are a bunch of researchers from University of Oxford, and they're trying to measure the topography of some of the mountains and see how they're aging. And I just love researchers for the reason that it's just so underfunded group of people that are trying to do some really good things and trying to establish some level of collective effort so that they can all work together on some really problems that haven't been fully addressed yet and propose novel thesis on things. So I think planetary resilience DAO is great. I think they're solving a really, really important problem. Yeah,
that's great. And actually that feeds into what Artharva was saying here in the chat as well. A DAO idea, fully integrated research and dev DAO for backyard to collegiate scientists. Yeah, perfectly on pace there. Shreyas, let's finish up with you. Anything that gets you excited right now?
Yeah, actually, related to like a science-related DAO, like Vida DAO, and I'll drop a link. Is doing some interesting work on funding and supporting longevity research, which I find interesting. And more relevant to India, it's not, I wouldn't say it's structured as a DAO, but it definitely was powered by a huge community and raised a lot of capital and attention. Is India's COVID relief efforts that Sandeep and others pioneered. It was really cool to. I was sort of involved with that as well when that happened, and it raised like hundreds of millions of dollars, and had an amazing swarm of contributors, which I think is a very, again, Web3 cultural thing, which is, I remember that group during the peak of India's sort of reeling from really bad situation of hospitalization and deaths and lack of hospital beds. There were just people who just dropped their jobs and just worked overtime and just helped basically coordinate these calls with facilitating getting beds or distributing the money. And I thought that was really cool to see. It's probably one of the biggest crypto success stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So in short, yes, there are DAOs trying to impact the real world, or the physical world is probably a better way to say it, and many more interesting experiments to come. So we are coming up against the clock here. So thank you to everybody for asking their questions. I do want to give all the panelists a chance to do a quick plug or kind of tell people where to go next if they want to learn more about you and what you're working on. So again, we'll just go around the horn here. James, where can the audience learn more about the stuff that you guys are building? You are muted, unfortunately, right now.
Sorry. Follow us on Twitter, Collabland. It's really support questions, but we're turning it into this kind of public forum. So Twitter and Medium for Collabland, and Substack, and we are starting this process of decentralization. So we're in this transition and going to be opening up a lot more as time goes on. So yes, please follow us in understanding. And if you want to learn how we go from a centralized top-down organization and transition into a DAO. And if you're curious about that, we're going to be talking a lot about it in our Substack, Medium, and Twitter. So.
Fantastic. That's going to be super valuable for the entire space, honestly. Rohit, where should people keep up with you and what Lightspeed is up to?
Yeah, I think interesting things are afoot at Lightspeed. A bunch of big announcements coming up from our fund side. Always looking to back really, really interesting founders, or even if you want to brainstorm, always open. I'm very active on Twitter and Telegram. My handle's the same. Feel free to reach out. Look forward to collaborating with all of you.
Look at that. Talk about high trust, putting his Telegram out there into to the Zoom chat. Like, gotta love it. Janil, how about you?
Yeah, so you can find, you can learn more about Coinwise at coinwise.co. We're open source. You can check us out on Twitter at CoinwiseCo. We have a really big announcement coming up very soon. So I'd actually even encourage you to follow us because, and yeah, you can follow me at Xerox Channel. Thank you for listening.
Janil's a nice guy. I'm not going to encourage. I'm going to demand that everybody go follow Coinbase because they're constantly shipping great stuff. And Shreyas, for you and the Llama community.
Yes, I'll drop my Twitter handle if anyone wants to DM me, and then with questions, and then I'll drop Llama's Substack as well as maybe the Twitter handle. But yeah, we publish a bi-weekly Substack newsletter just with everything that's happening in the community, and then we publish like longer mirror posts as well. So a lot of our work is pretty public, like you can see on governance forums, and you can kind of track along. But I think the Substack kind of helps curate all the work we're doing. But yeah, it was great, very fun. Thanks for the session. And I also do want to shout out to I like Devfolio and Shakti. He's no more now, but he's been a big influence on me, and I think a lot of builders in India. And so glad that the Devfolio team is kind of continuing and with his mission and doing a great job. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Absolutely. Cool. I'm not sure if as a moderator I'm allowed to plug, but I'm going to make one anyway. If you are looking to work in Web3, you should definitely check out Super Team, join the talent network over here. And if you have questions on DAOs or anything else like that, feel free to DM me anytime on Twitter as well. With that, we are 1.5 minutes over, so we will call this to a close. Thank you to our fantastic panelists, and thank you to everybody who attended, asked some great questions. Hopefully you got some value out of this. We cannot wait to see what you build for this Eternals Hackathon. Catch you guys on Twitter, Discord, and everywhere else. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.